everyone and welcome back. It's Twiz and I'm very happy to have you back around here for, well, the third stream of our game dev adventure. Basically last time we struggled, so yesterday we struggled quite a bit with some errors that we have concerning the texture loading basically. Because we could only load the grass and the dirt texture, but I fixed that, so that was the end of the last stream, I think. And well, today we want to get started on the 3D terrain. So in order to do that, we're gonna need to do a couple of things. First of all, let me show you that we also have the other textures working now. First of all, we need to kind of define what we need as prerequisites. And one very important thing is that in order to calculate here we have the stone, in order to calculate where we have which side of the cubes basically, we of course need to know whether one cell has a neighbor, and if so, how high the neighbor is. If the neighbor is lower than the cell we're currently drawing, then of course so if the neighbor is higher, we don't need to draw any faces on the side of our cell, but if the neighbor is lower, then of course we need to draw side chords. So let's get started real quick by first of all implementing those neighbors. So I guess we want to have these neighbors as a cell array. So probably gonna do something like, maybe we should do that private though. Then let's say this is gonna be cell neighbors. Perfect. Then what's your problem? Do we need to define that as a null pointer? Ah, okay, because we don't know about the cell in the cell, that doesn't make any sense. But alright, I don't care if it works, and apparently it does. So that's good. Then of course we need to set those neighbors, and therefore maybe we should do set or void set neighbor or neighbors, and then basically we're gonna pass an array of neighbors and assign them as the neighbors. And maybe should we do, no, we don't need a getter, I think, because we'll only access that from within the cell. And then, well, basically what we also want to do, of course, is define directions in our 3D world. So let's just call that direction.cpp. No, .h, as we're going to do it as an enum. And then let's just say pragma once as always. And then let's do enum class direction. And then I would like to start with northwest, northeast. But let's actually do it as this, so it's a little shorter. That's not correct. That's east, then we have southeast, then we have south, and then we have southwest. And then, well, west is missing, right? northwest, north, northeast, east, yeah. That should be 6 in total. Yes, it starts of course with 0, so that's fine. Just like that, perfect. Then I think we can already close that. Of course we need to add that in here. And as we did that, that should be included and should be running fine. Then next up, well, first of all, we should basically not do it this way, I think. We're just going to do set neighbor, and then we're going to do this neighbors, and then we're going to pass only one neighbor, only going to be one cell. Like that, perfect. And then in here, we of course need the direction then. So let's say direction, whatever. Let's just keep it short and include that here. Like that. And in here we can just say static cast int and then the direction. I think we need to put it in parentheses. Yeah, now that's working, and that's of course gonna be the input, so neighbors singular. Perfect, so we can set a neighbor for a cell. So let's go back to chunk basically and do a set neighbors method here as well. This is going to be a little more complicated though. So basically what we want to do, of course, is have some inputs for that. Set neighbors. Then we're definitely going to need to know which cell we're talking about. Cell, this cell, or let's say current cell maybe. Then we're going to need nothing else, I think, right? Should be fine. And then of course we need to define that. Let's just do it down here. Void chunk set neighbors, and then we're gonna go from x to, no, that's not what I wanted to do, thanks. But we could do it this way, and then we don't even need this one. So we loop through all the cells in the chunk on the x and then on the z, and then we call our current cell and say if our cell is existent, then set cell set neighbor for the directions west, east, south and north. That should already be fine. If the x is greater than 0, okay, so basically what that means is we can't set any cells on the outside of our chunk as neighbors. That of course isn't ideal because we also want those, but we can deal with that later on. So let's not worry too much. For now we have the 4 directions that are important. Then let's remove the cell from here. And with that out of the way, as we have neighbors in our cells now, basically, of course, we need to call that as soon as we created the chunk, or actually as soon as we created the cells. So here it's fine, I think. So cells initialized sounds good, and then let's do set neighbors basically. And then let's say neighbor set, perfect. And with that then done, we can actually start working on our world management. So first of all, we want to work on that. That was just some testing for our terrain textures. I can quickly show you that if you are interested, of course. Nope, not like that. Definitely wanted to comment that out first. Maybe it's no, it's not working this way, right? No, it crashed. Okay, so maybe it's something else even, once again. So let's not worry about that too much and deal with our world generation. So basically what I would like to do is generate this terrain type stack dependent on our X and Z location in the world. And for now we're just gonna do, as we don't want to deal with noise and all of that kind of stuff yet, we're just gonna do a sign function for that, I think. So let's think about that for a little second. We definitely want to have, well, the size to be, the chunk height is fine. I think we have a chunk height of 10 or something like that right now. Let's see. It's in chunk.h. Chunk height should be 10, yeah. But probably we're going to change that. So we start off with a vector full of air terrain types, and we change that out, of course, and then we also loop through the chunk height here. That is also great. But what we want to do then is basically, instead of doing that dependent only on the chunk height, we also want to say that we want to change that dependent on the X and Y, or X and Z, as I said. So let's first of all, before we do anything, create our real coordinates. So let's say int current x equals chunk x times 16 plus local x. Might be a thing, but let's just use chunk dot get. We don't have a reference to chunk. That's bad, of course. Can't we access that from in here? And let's just look it up and hard code it for now. We can always change the reference there. Chunk size is 4, it's int chunk size. Let's just add, we have the int with the get chunk size, but we need a reference in world manager. Can we just include chunk here? Or will we have these problems with circular includes again? And then, well, let's just pass the chunk. That's way easier. So let's just say we have then we can even get rid of all of that. But we're calling that in cell. Cell has a reference to its chunk, right? Why can't we go there? References. Let's see. Cell. The right one. There we go. So was that? Why don't we call that anywhere? Where do we do that? We do that in chunk and pass it to the cell then when it's created. Yeah. Or while creation, actually. So we can easily set our chunk instead. So let's do this. And then let's work on chunk. No, it's the world manager, this thing it is. So let's say instead we want chunk here. But of course it's gonna be referenced. And then we don't need the chunk height there either. So in world manager.cpp we can just say chunk.get chunk height. But let's first of all update this one as well. We have the chunk get chunk height. Don't forget the parentheses. Then we can do the chunk get chunk x. We don't have that. We just access that. Chunk cpp. It's world x and world z. And that's already available. And then of course we want to get the chunk size with parentheses. And then we exchange that to Z everywhere. So basically only these two. And then we have our current world position. And then we're gonna loop through the height once more. Chunk.get chunk height. And I don't want to do it this way. Instead, of course, we want to do it after the fact. And then let's say, first of all, our current height, or basically let's calculate our max height, and max height equals not get chunk height, but instead let's do how can we do that easily? Basically it's sine current x, sine, Let me think about that for a tiny little second. I think we want to basically do sine of world x and the cosinus of z. I think that's it. Yeah, let's just do standard sine of current x. Well, let's call that our frequency or something like that, float terrain frequency. And then we're just gonna add std cosine of current z times terrain frequency. Okay, so then we should have a good max height here, and then we're gonna loop through all of the things, and if I is less than max height, let's say stack is equal to grass, but that's not the way I want that. So basically, if that happens, let's first of all close off this bracket here. And then if that happens, that we're still under the max height, then basically what we want to do is set all of the terrain types. So if, or should we do equals less than or equal to max height, and then if do we need to multiply that by something so it stays below the 10, or is it just not gonna work? I think the latter. So if I equals to get chunk height -1, then please do grass as a top layer. Top layer is grass. Else if I bigger than max height -3, it's dirt, sounds fine. And else it's gonna be stone. But let's say that's maybe 4 or something like that. But maybe we shouldn't do that from the top, but we can just try. Okay, so this get terrain type stack is not compatible, it says, but let's first of all check. So this is done. Then we have the terrain type stack. Don't really need that print right now, but we can always use it later on, of course. Let's actually comment that out this way. Perfect, and then in chunk. What's the matter here? Of course, we want to do it as a reference here. That was the issue, I think. Let's just run that and see what the debug error is going to be like. Okay, so basically we're missing something in CPP, in World CPP, World Manager CPP 39. This closes the for loop, this closes this thing, and this else here doesn't have a closing bracket. And what else was there? Let's just try it once more. I think we need to star this or something like that. yeah. Can't we then just use this? Or is it the other way around? Always get confused with these things. Huh? Let's just have a look and copy that and give that to our friend because we're stupid. And AI isn't. Well, it is most of the time. But that's what I had a second ago, right? Then he also complained. Was this? Yeah, it was just the leftover issue. Okay, and then we're closing right away. That's of course bad. Because we don't really see why it is closing. We could of course just ask our friend, but let's do something else instead maybe. Let's set up a debug functionality so that the content of our console gets also written to a debug.log file. So we can actually see what was going on. With a custom stream buffer. Okay, that's interesting. Let's try that. So in application, no, in main, straight after that, just gonna do that, and then we're gonna define our tbuff, and that's just gonna be the H file, yeah, the header file. No, rename. That should be debug log.h, right? Or am I stupid? Let's just ask him, do we need to call it debug log.h or just whatever dbuff. Let's just post that in there. No, that's fine, I would say. And then let's include that in here. And then that's all gone, and we should now have the output to everywhere, or basically to debug.log file. There we have it. And we're getting an error apparently after cells initialized. So that's happening in chunk, but that's the first chunk. So there's something wrong with our code, of course. So we do the cells initialized, and then the set neighbors apparently doesn't work, right? Yeah. So let's go back to set neighbors and just put a breakpoint there. Okay, there we have chunk size is 4, x is not yet implemented. Let's just step into, then x should be 0. Chunk size still 4, I guess, so let's step further. Then nope, let's step out again. Then let's go till here maybe, just one step further. Okay, so that works. And let's just do it one by one. Okay, so this doesn't work. So let's see. If our cell x is less than chunk size minus 1, that's basically chunk size is 16 minus 1, right? Or what do we have for chunk size right now? Check. Chunk size is currently 4. Yeah, let's go back to our 16 as we had before. And then this basically means we go from 0 to 15, 0 to 15. So this is going to be from 0 to 15, 0 to 15 basically. And in here, that seems to work. If x is greater than 0, we basically, so that means if x is 0, we don't have a neighbor in the west direction. But of course, we should also make sure to how could we do that? That it's less than so the x should be less than the chunk size minus 1 as well, right? Or do we need to do minus 1, but we're only looping through those, so that should actually be fine. Stupid me. And then in the eastern direction, it should be less than chunk size minus 1. I think that should be correct. And then what do we have here? X plus 1, z stays the same. So something's going on here that's not working out. Let's debug once again. And then we have that one worked, but this one doesn't, because, well, x is currently 0, which is definitely smaller than 15. Do we have the cell? Yeah, that's looking as if it's initialized. And then we have cells, and there we're going to put in 1. And 0. So basically 1 and 0. And then we're gonna say in the direction east. Cell set neighbor, let's check that again. Can we initialize that as an array of null pointers? Let's just ask our friend. Where are we crashing again? Here. Then let's also add the cell.h as well as the cell.cpp. And have a look what he has to offer. Okay, looking at your cell class and cell h, the neighbors vector is declared but never initialized. Yeah. So blah blah blah. Okay, how to fix in our cell constructor. We don't initialize that here or neither here, right? Yeah. So then let's just add neighbors like this. But it should be 8, right? Or am I stupid? Because we have 8 directions. We don't really care about the diagonal ones for now, but maybe we'll do later on. Just see if that's going on, and then we can work further on implementing all of that stuff. Let's for now just remove those breakpoints, please. And we definitely need to get rid of some of these calls for outputs. Okay, so that's looking good, although it should be dirt, right? It should actually be grass as far as I'm concerned. Because that's the top layer that we see here. But it's working, so that's great. It's not working with the sign yet, I think. Or we're not drawing correct. So let's see, in cell draw, we currently only have this one draw method. And basically what we're doing is calculating the positions. And those are all at 0. Okay, so basically what we want to do instead here is of course calculate the height of the cell. So let's say float cell height equals, or don't we have a function for the cell height? Let's check that. Nope. Got the float height, but we don't have a get height. So then let's say we want to have a float get height, return height. Nope. Return size of terrain types. That's a little complicated. We just do it this way. Friend. Nope. We want to do it where... Let's just find a good way of doing that with Copilot. How to differentiate, how to get height of terrain types not filled with air. So basically we want to check whether it's air or not. So we could do something like this and do here instead this goes somewhere else. way back here, and then it's fine, but he is doing something else. He loops through all of them, and then if the terrain type is air, then it get height. That's a little weird. Nope, 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 nope. Not doing it like that. And we're just gonna do it differently. So let's say we have our float h for height equals 0. And then we're gonna loop through all the terrain types. And if they are present, then let's just add 1. Sounds good. And if it's air, then not. What we could do instead, though, is say if the type is not air, h equals or plus equals 1, and then in the end, of course, we want to return h. Only add if non-air type. Sounds good. Then where were we at? In chunk, I think, right? Nope. World manager? Nope. World manager CPP, I think it was. So let's say if the chunk dot, so we're looping through the height, so all of the blocks, if the chunk height is, oh well, somewhere totally different. This is fine, we were in cell and we wanted to define the height here, so let's just get height, and let's just put that everywhere, but as we're looping around in there, it's probably better if we just say float cell height equals get chunk, nope, not get chunk height, just get height, please. Oh, cell. Or this, basically. Basically it's this dot get height. Then we can just do this, no? Thought so, yes. And then let's just do cell height in here. And then that should work already. So now the thing is, I would like to cut all of that and put it in a different method. Let's say method is cell draw top face. Like that. And then of course we need to pass the chunk reference. And then we're gonna call that here draw top face chunk. Nice. And then why don't we have access to this? Probably because it's just broken as we don't have this yet. So let's say we have our void draw top face, and hopefully this is also going to be fine. Yes, that's looking great. So let's have a look. It should now change the height, but of course we only draw the top faces of our cells, so it's gonna look a little weird, and we definitely need to get rid of all of these console couts. Okay, not as expected, but fine, I would say. I think that's because we have this terrain frequency set to 0, 1 at the moment. We could, of course, say we want to do a little... well, what we could do, where do we do that again? In World Manager, I guess. And there we're doing that. So terrain frequency we could just leave like that for now, I think. What I would like to do is actually, well, basically we need to find a way of multiplying our height by our chunk size, or getting our height to somewhere in between 0 and 1, so we can multiply it with the chunk height. I think that's a good idea, because then it's a little normalized and all of that kind of good stuff. So let's think about this once again. We want to basically add them together, but I think we want the x to be a little less influential on this. So let's just do times 0.5, and then let's say int max height equals to max height. Oh no, just max height. Max height equals to max height time, well, let's do +1, right, times 0.5. So if the max height would be 0, then we can, all of this would be 0, and then we would get out 0, and that would be not the way we want to. So this is better if we add 1 before we do that, and then we're of course going to subtract 1 from the chunk height. Okay, so basically that should work now. Let's see how it's looking compared to before. Hello, Navin Pandey. Best of luck, bro. Thanks. Thanks a lot, and welcome here in the stream. Okay, that's looking a little wild. Should be able to move around better. That would be at least nice. And we need to turn on cull faces again, so we don't draw the underside of our things. So let's add something to our input type of thing, so we can use space and shift to go up and down. So where's our camera? Process keyboard. Let's say we also have a float delta y. And of course we're going to add that in here. Okay, and then let's see our delta. We also had this up thing, right? We have the up. So we could just do position plus equals up times delta y times velocity. That's good. And then in the input manager, we're just gonna add if our glfw get key is space, did he listen to me? And then let's say, nope, let's not do that. Let's say y is plus equal 4, and if it's left shift, it should be -4. Great, then let's do float y as well, and pass that in here. And this should be also fine, and then we should at least be able to move up and down as well. That's going to be helpful, I guess. Hello, Harper Venom. Harper Venom. Well, factory game dev, what is it? I played a lot of factory games, and I really enjoyed that. But of course, as the time goes on, then I definitely had some own ideas how I would like to have well, basically my dream game. And now I'm working on it, and I thought, why not share it with you? Probably it's not that exciting to watch most of the time, because, well, coding isn't too much too exciting to watch. But on the other hand, well, you can tune in from time to time and get an update, and maybe I'll also post some shorter videos cut out of these streams, but that's a lot of work, and this project is already going to be a lot of work. So I don't really know about that yet. Okay, so this is looking a little weird, I have to say. Let's just work on these side faces in a few more minutes and focus on what's going on here. Can we add those? Well, we don't need the debug lines yet. They are not really beneficial right now. Let's start with a camera that's a little higher. Where do we define our camera? There. Let's say we're at, I don't know, 30. Wow, that takes way too long. We need to immediately get rid of these calls. Okay, then let's maybe say our terrain frequency is a little higher. Or should we? No, let's just get rid of all of the unnecessary couts. That's fine, that's fine, that's fine. I think the most that are annoying are in cell and in chunk and world. And in the shader as well, I think. We had some issues with our shader last time, so that's why we have all of these debug statements all over the place. Hello, Galactic Past. Well, yes, of course, I'm using libraries, but I try to stick to mostly C++ OpenGL basics. So what do we have for libraries here? Basically the GLAD and GLFW, so basically the standard OpenGL setup, and then for now we are just using the STB image, which basically loads textures and so on for us. And then later on, of course, for our 3D models and so on, we'll also need some more, like, for example, I can just show you another project that I did a couple of weeks or months ago, I don't know, where we are a little further than where we are right now. It's just starting up, it's going to take a little while, but basically not a lot of libraries. I've done other things in, well, basically Unity, tried some Unreal, did some Blender and so on, but basically this is what we're currently aiming for. And in order to load these models, we of course need other libraries, and therefore we're gonna use, how's that called again? Give me a second, that's asymp, I think, right? I think it's asymp. But I can check that real quick actually and see, because, well, we have this model here. Yes, it's asymp. So basically that's how you write it down here, asymp, A-S-S-I-M-P. And, well, that's going to be important later on, of course. But for now, shader should be fine. We should go back to where we were at. I think we wanted to fix the issue with our with these weird things. No, the object files are for, well, basically I'm doing the objects in Blender, exporting them as objects, and then importing them as asymp. Or that's actually what I did in the past. Maybe we're going to do something different here, I don't know yet exactly. We're not at model loading stage yet. And as far as I'm concerned, glfw is more like the library that's used for, well, actually the window creation and that kind of stuff. So real OpenGL in Windows, I think, but I'm actually not that sure about that. But we can just go ahead and have a look in here. Well, it's a DLL, we can't see anything there, stupid. Neither in there. But, well, let's go back to the topic. Currently, we're having these weird, really big height differences here. And that's kind of unexpected, I would say. So let's go back to World Manager first of all and think about that. So we're gonna get a chunk height, and this chunk height is basically 10 still, or did we up that to 20? I think we upped that to 20. Let's do that now then, and just run again and have a look. And then let's go back to World Manager. And so basically we're going from 0 to 19 here, and then what are we actually calling there? Calling cell draw, that's annoying. Cell draw, nope. And then chunk draw. And then let's go back here though. Okay, so basically what changed was the overall height. So I think the problem is currently our sign function. Might that be it? So World Manager, get height. Please check my code here. Unexpected behavior in terms of height, but we can also just, before we do that, let's just think about that. So we're doing the, of course that's also GLTF. Well, basically you can also use GLTF, sorry, for the same thing, and you can also import them with asymp as far as I'm concerned. But that wasn't your question, you just wanted to know whether it's GLTF or object. And for now I've used this wavefront object type of thing, but I don't think it really matters for my purposes, but I could be totally wrong. Let's go back here though. So for the 0 till 19 now, we're gonna check if our I is below the max height, below or equal to the max height, and our max height is defined by our sign function. It should have been, yeah, it is. It's our sign function. So I think this multiplication here doesn't really work out, because probably here it's kind of 0 or 1, right? Do we need to set an offset here first? That could be a thing. So we should do the sign of that. And then I think, nope, I did a mistake here, I think we just want to multiply all of that by 0.5, right? Let's check again. Not 100% sure, but I think that was the thing last time as well. Okay, didn't really work. So it seems to me as if it's all 0 now. Let's see. World or current x is also correct, I guess. We have the chunk get world x and we have the local x. And do we still pass the right local x and so on? Where do we use that again? Chunk x and z, yeah, that should be the local x and that, yeah. That's stupid though. We shouldn't use x and z here. We should use something else instead. Just to make sure, we're gonna do I for x. Because we have x already here, and then that's gonna be a little freaked out, I think. Hello? I, yeah, perfect. And then this is also going to be I, and this is going to be J, I think, and this is going to be J, and this is going to be J, and this, and this. Okay, go back to the chat real quick. Galactic Past, well, no, I didn't really try Vulkan. But I know that there's some games that use that. That's basically it. And game, everything besides OpenGL and OpenGL, yes, but GL is garbage. Yeah, that's a little harsh maybe, but well, as I said, I tried Unity and so on, and I wasn't too happy with that. Because, well, at some point you'll run into problems that you not really get around, and that's just annoying then if you've spent a lot of time, or maybe it also was just stupid for me. But I always had some issues that I didn't get around, and I like to do this very, well, deep level coding, if you can say that about this. It's not assembler, but it's fine. And yeah, I don't think it's deprecated. Why should it be? As game says, it's running on almost every platform, and it works just great, doesn't it? Don't all of the things like, I don't know, Unreal Engine and so on also basically work on OpenGL? I'm not too deep into how they work on that level, but I think so, no? Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Okay, so focus again for a second. What did we change? Don't even know the exact term for deprecated. Vulkan is the new meta. Okay, if you say so. Let me think about for a second. So if our max height, the sign is gonna be, okay, current x, current z, it should be fine as far as I'm concerned. And then we have our max height plus 1 plus our times the 0.5 times the chunk height. Should be correct. Let's check our... Yeah, if it's 0, it's gonna return, so it's not gonna do anything. if it would have returned, we wouldn't get anything drawn to the screen as far as I'm concerned. So let's see, we're gonna look through that. And in here we say the top block should be grass. So if I equals the chunk height minus 1, so chunk height is 20. If I is 19, which is the max value we can get here, of course, then it should be grass. And then else if the max height, or if I is bigger than max height minus 4, let's just say minus 5, or minus 6, I don't care, then the stack I should be dirt, and if, or anything else should be stone. Okay, so that should in theory work right. So let's just ask our friend here. That's what I love about this, well, Visual Studio Code nowadays. It's just gotten so great with the Copilot. Please check my code here. I have some issues generating my terrain. It's just flat dirt. I wanted to make it a sign world dependent on the world position of the cell. Ah, we did it as an int. Yeah, that's stupid, of course. Let's just do it as a float. Yeah, probably that was all there was to it. Did you have any other? Normalized to 0. Yeah, but that's what we do, no? Okay, so that's looking a little better, I would say. That's more like I've expected it. Let's make our world a little bigger. World.age, let's just say we have 16 by 16 by 16 by 16. So chunk size is 16 by 16, world size is 16 by 16 chunks. And then we crash. Okay, interesting. Let's go back to 4 then. I think it's to do with the float that we changed, probably, not with what we just did. Ah, no, it's basically just an issue generating all of that stuff. Then let's also say we want to stop calling this initialized chunk, cell array initialized, and cells initial. Let's just remove all of these, right? All of these calls. Should mostly be in chunk. Of course, it's also not optimized yet, so probably just couldn't handle the big big world yet. And then maybe let's just go with something a little more. Let's just try again. Don't think that that's the thing. Probably we'll need to reduce that, but it's gonna be fine. Or do we somewhere set or decide something dependent on the world size and don't use the world size variable? Apparently not, okay. But that's already kind of great, I would say. And then of course what we want to change is also the well, we want to draw the sides and so on, but as I said in the beginning, we want to disable the GL culling, cull face, GL cull face. And there we have the GL disable col face. But we want, wait a second. Is that correct? I always get it wrong. Let's just try. Maybe it would be easier if I knew what col really means. Okay, so that didn't work yet. So it's probably the other way around. Or do we have col face somewhere here? I don't think so. Okay, so now we're drawing everything from the bottom. That's bad. Why is that? Well, let me out real quick. How does the col face work? Now only the bottom of our texture is drawn. So we can just understand how that's working. Yeah, but as I also said, I want GL front face counterclockwise. So I think we should be actually good with that then, right? Or do we need to, well, no, disable we only want to do if we don't get it working at all, but that's not an option. That would be super much performance wasted. But it's the same issue again, I think. Yeah. Okay. Why isn't that working? No, I don't want change the vertex order and add quad to be counterclockwise from the top. Okay, let's try that. In our add quad, that's in chunk. What's render doc? No, don't know about that. Sounds very interesting, but also kind of complicated to get into. Okay, where were we at? We wanted to change our add quad method in chunk basically, or check whether it's the wrong way around. But basically we're just giving it here. So what we need to check, what we actually need to check is where we add the quad in, where we use the function basically. Here we're doing 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, so that's fine. And what I was thinking is our cell from the top, let's just open Paint again as the last days. Maybe you can correct me on what I'm doing right now, but what I would think is if we add, well, our quad that we want to draw, and now it's gonna get messy and ugly. I thought, well, it doesn't really matter in which direction. Yeah, but I would need to get my whole project set up with that first, and not too interested in that, I think. And I thought when we're going counterclockwise, if we start here with 0, 1, 2, and 3, beautiful. Then, so that's what we're doing here, if that's X and that's Z, basically. You don't need that. What don't I need? So basically what I was thinking is, if we have our position of the cell here in the middle, then we have our X as X minus half the size for our first vertex, our cell height for the Y value, and then our Z is Z minus half size. So also going down, right? Ah, okay, that sounds great. And I'm just gonna download that on the side here. Have a look. But I don't think that it's gonna help me fix that real quick. I think from the logic it should be alright here, what I was doing. So let me just compare that to what I did back in the day. Just for good measure. Draw top face. And there we did basically our X minus 0.5 times the cell size or height, and the base Z minus, that should be fine, yeah? And then okay, but there I didn't, okay, so that's messed up here, I think. Interesting. So that's also gonna be minus, or what? No. I set it up in a 2D array last time, so that's why I'm struggling right now a little bit. But we could, of course, do that as well, I think. If we were to say this is a 2 by 2, and it's easier to work with X and Z, I would say. Then of course we need to change all of that here. 0, 0. And then we would have 0, 1 first, and then we would have annoying. What's going on here? 1, 0, 1, 1, and then basically we are just going to do the same thing here. Right, okay, then let me go through these numbers real quick again. We have the X minus half the size, then we have the X plus half the size, X plus half the size, and X minus half the size. Maybe those two are the other way around. Let's say this is 0, 0, this is 0, 1, this is 1, 0, and this is 1, 1. So in 0, 0 we need minus, minus. In 0, 1 we need plus, minus. In 1, 0 we need minus plus, and there we need plus plus. Okay, then let's just see. Maybe that was just a little messed up. But Galactic Past, thanks a lot for the tip with render doc. Definitely gonna check that out if it's not gonna work for me here. Okay, so one triangle is correct already and the other isn't. Is it? Okay, so that gets drawn from below. Probably what could be a thing is where we set those triangles at... No, these should be fine. Let's just ask him. Change my positions here. Positional array to be 2D instead. Help me fix one triangle gets drawn as expected. The other one isn't. One gets drawn below that edge. Yeah, but I don't need to start in the top left. I don't think so. No, it's bottom left here. Okay, yeah. Top left. Okay, yeah, fine. But that's not counterclockwise in my mind. Ah, the text chords got messed up or what? Okay, let's say we use these as we're doing here. That's perfect, perfectly correct, I mean. And then let's see. Ah, okay, so he says it's not correct. So let's do 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. Doesn't make too much sense in my head right now to go bottom left to top left if we're doing counterclockwise, but who am I? Now it's working again, perfect. And we don't have any faces drawn from below. That's great. So now we can finally move on and, well, work with the no, one more thing to check is actually in our world manager, why are we currently getting dirt? Because probably our max height actually we need to say else stacks air. No, we don't need to say that because we define all of the stack as air, but that's going to be fine. So let's think about that real quick again. Stone should be in the bottom. That's just fine. If we say that our max height is going to be the top of our stuff there, and if we say max is lower or equal to max height, and if it's, yeah, let's not do it this way, let's do it this way instead. That makes more sense. That should work now, right? So now we should hopefully have some grass at the top. Still not. Great. Then let's say if it's bigger than, no, if it's smaller than max height minus 2. Gonna see later on whether that's really working the way we want it to. Still not. Okay, then let's start with the side faces so we don't get stuck here for too long. And we're gonna have a look at that in a second then. So let's go back to cell and add a draw sides method. Or let's actually start to do that in cell.h as we need to do it anyway. So basically we could do those as private, I think. Then we're also gonna have void draw sides. And then we're gonna have void draw side for a single side of our cell. Also gonna pass the chunk. Then we're gonna need the direction. Perfect. And we don't need any of that, I think. And then we need to draw side face. And then we also want the chunk, of course. And we want the current height. Okay, then let's start implementing those. First of all, let's do the draw sides. Stupid me. Void cell draw sides, perfect. Then we're gonna go for direction. We could just skip every second. No, as we start in the northwest, we skip every second but start with the first. So let's say if direction, let's cast that to static int direction. Nope. I think so. Direction. Dear, can we do that? Nope. And let's say we loop through all of these. Then we don't need to define that, right? Can I just get rid of this if we loop all of these? Nope. Just would need to set all of them. Yeah, then let's just loop through them like that. But let's name them as we did. Okay, and then it's gonna do north, south, east, west. Perfect. We're gonna pass the directions to draw side. And let's do void cell draw side. And in there, we're gonna get our current height, but not with the get height function. Nope. And then we need to figure that out first of all. So basically, our height is dependent on our neighbor. So we should first of all get our current neighbor. Let's say cell neighbor. Yeah, that's also a good call. If there's no neighbor, draw the side face or draw the side. Basically, I would probably like to do it the other way around, right? If we have a neighbor, so if it's not a null pointer, then we want to return or if our neighbor, no, and, of course, and. If we have a neighbor and the neighbor height is higher than get height, no. If we have a neighbor, then we want to do that, and then we can draw the height. Or basically, then we can do what we need to do here, and that is, first of all, get our height, and then loop through that height. So basically what we're going to do is, for int I is 0, then we're not going to do that. We're going to do a new difference. And then we're going to do int difference is this. Then we can get rid of the current height. And that's just going to be I. And then we're going to loop from 0 to difference. Nope, that's completely wrong, right? We need to do it the other way around. We need to loop from the height of the neighbor to our height, basically, right? Think about that for a little bit. Yeah, let's just do that a little more advanced. Let's say we have an int neighbor height equal to neighbor, and that's a good idea to check whether it's existent. If it's non-existent, the height is 0, and then we need to draw all of it. So then let's go with the difference. If the int difference is the get height minus the neighbor height, yeah. And then if the difference is less than, no, if the difference is greater than 0, as we subtract the neighbor height from our height, if it's positive, it means we need to draw, basically, so we can get rid of all of that. And then inside here, we're gonna loop through, as I said, for int I equals 0, I less than difference, and then we're just gonna pass not only our I, but our neighbor height plus our I. And then that should draw the, well, call the right function here. So let's do void cell draw side face. That's wild, probably because I have another window open. So let's just remove all of that for now and think a little about that. So in the draw side faces, we're gonna need, of course, as we do in our draw top face, we're gonna have some positions, and we're gonna have some text chords. So let's do those. I think that's gonna be a little complicated, but we're gonna get there. Let's just say we have our positions, so those are gonna be in an array, and we're gonna use the glm vec3, and that's gonna be 4 though. Positions, why is that underlined? Oh, maybe it's gonna get fixed. Or did I mess something up? I don't know. Let's also do some text chords. But let's define them later. And then we're just gonna loop through basically all of these sides. Or basically, no, we're gonna get a switch statement there. But in order to do that, we first of all need to calculate once more our position. So should we use X? Did cell have an X? No, it has local, and that's all. Okay, then let's go back here and let's just call that X then, and that's gonna be the, yeah, that's all in, so let's cast those. Static cast float, and then we have the local X plus the chunk get world X times the chunk get chunk size, and then we do the same for the Z. That's great. With that, we can basically then get our bottom height and our top height, I think, as well. And how are we gonna, well, that's basically current height, right? Should be just current height, I think. Yeah, or current height plus 1 for the y1. So let's say y0, or let's call that a float, y0 equals that and that, perfect. And then do the text chords for the full quad. We just named them text chord, I think. And then let's say text chords equals to, that sounds good, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. Yeah, that's, I think, the way it needs to be here. What's the issue here? It's something I don't really get right now. Yeah, let's not worry too much about that and deal with that as soon as we're done. So if we have that, then we can basically calculate some min and maxes. So min x equals x, yeah, times the cell size actually. Do we have the cell size here? Should be available in cell, right? Yeah, okay. And then we can do the same for the max, and the same for the min z, and the same for the max z. Perfect. Then what we're gonna do is, what the hell? Did we just, no, it's down there, okay. Yeah, let's just go with all of that. Why is it acting up so weird? So let's say we have our direction and it's north. Then, of course, if it's north, we want to have the minimum maximum. Is that correct? Yeah, min max should be fine. Then we have the max x and still the max z. That should all be max z. Yeah, that's fine. Then we have min max, max min. That makes sense. Also, yeah, also fine. And then down here we have for south. Shouldn't we start with max min max? Yeah, I think that's a little messed up. Okay, and then for east, all of these are of course gonna be max, and for west min, that makes sense. And then we have the, I would say, max z, min z, min z, and max z. And then down here it should be the other way around, min, max, max, min. So what are you worrying about? Can't you do that? Yeah, then go ahead and do it this way. I don't mind. Then this is also messed up, right? Let's check again. What if we were to call you here? Okay, that was easy. And then all of that is fine. Okay, perfect. No, we still have an error. Where's that? Then let's just go ahead and try whether that's working or not. Probably messed up somewhere. We also have the invalid direction. That's nice. Then let's see. I don't see any yet. Neither from the inside. Because we probably forgot to call that. Yes. Draw sides. So let's see, is it working now? Hello, it's Nukes. Well, I don't know any about Vulkan yet, so I can't really tell you about that. And well, OpenGL can be a little harsh sometimes, I would say, yeah. Like for example, now I would expect to have our sides drawn, but we don't have any yet. So let's just add some debug statements here. Draw sides, calls, loops through the directions, and then calls draw side. And then what's going on here? Let's first of all make the world a lot smaller. Basically one chunk is going to be fine for now, I think. And then go back to cell. And then let's see again. We're gonna do draw sides here. Then we're going in here. Let's just say we wanted to standard out drawing side. Okay. Then let's add something here. Nope, not there. There. Draw sides. Or actually it would be probably fine to do it here then. And then in draw side, of course, we need to, first of all, check whether we have the neighbor or not. So let's just say this is the neighbor height, and then let's just run that for a second. And to be really frank, it's nukes. I'm not an expert on that. I'm just doing that as a hobby, and well, I would say I'm a decent programmer, but in my job I don't do anything with C++ or OpenGL, so that's all learning new for me as well. Okay, we are drawing side 1, that's great. Then let's just do continue. Then we got the neighbor height for direction 1 is 15. What is our height though? We don't know about that yet, so we should print that out as well. So let's do that. I forgot to close it, it's not gonna work. Yeah, I think we can continue once. Then we have neighbor height is 15, current height is 15. So we don't need to draw any sides, of course. Why is he jumping to side 5 then? Okay, yeah, but that doesn't really matter. It's the opposite side, so let's just continue. And then we have 1, 5, 3, 7, and we have no neighbors on the which is that side for direction 5 should be south, right? Yeah, it should be south. That makes sense because we're on like Z0. There should be a southern neighbor, so that's correct. And there shouldn't be a western neighbor, that's also correct. So there we have the 0, so we should be drawing the stuff. Let's add in draw side face. Let's just say we want to do sorry, what did you? If current height is less than 0 or current height is bigger than get chunk height, that's an error. Okay, let's just go with that, sounds interesting. Okay, let's continue once or twice, maybe a few more times, and go ahead and check that. So basically here that's the northern neighbor, and there we have 15 and 15, so we don't need to draw a side face. Fine, okay. Then we have the southern side, and there we should be drawing side faces at height 0 to 14, so that's actually correct, yeah, but it's not working the way it should be, right? And it didn't say invalid height or something like that, so let's just remove the debug breakpoints and see whether we just are stupid or what's going on there. Or did any of you notice anything? Or are they drawn at a weird height or something like that? Apparently not. Okay, so, but it's saying that it's drawing side faces. So it should do that. So let's figure that out real quick. We got our base X and base Z basically for our current cell. Then we get our Y and Y1 for the different heights. And we set the texture coordinates. They should be fine as well. Then at the end, well, we always have these positions set, but we don't do anything. We don't add a quad yet. I'm stupid. Add quad with positions and text chords. What's your problem? Sorry, of course we need to chunk add quad. Stupid mistake, as always. And there we go. Okay, so as we can see, our code for what we generate where isn't working all correctly yet, but that's not going to be a big deal, I think. So we need to figure out the types, basically. So let's see. We don't want the current height. Yes, we want the current height, I would say. But the current height is something different than... No, the current height is I plus neighbor height, so it should be fine, I would say. Let me think about that for a second. I think we need to do a +1 there, maybe. I'm not 100% sure whether that's it. And we need to check our world manager again as well. Yeah, but now the top block also has its side the same texture as the top. And if I look at this, the dirt texture definitely needs an upgrade. I tried to do these tileable terrain textures on my own today, but they didn't come out too great. I think the stone is quite alright, but the rest... Well, sand is also looking good, I think, but dirt and grass are still a little ugly, so we'll need to work on that at some point as well. Okay, then let's go back to our world manager and figure this out, finally. So the top layer should be grass, so let's just say So the max height can't be bigger than the chunk height, right? Because the chunk height minus 1 gets multiplied by half and then multiplied by our value between 1 and 0, right? Or isn't that between 1 and 0 there? Let's check. Yeah, let's just kill that so we can actually see some of those. Ah, they can also be negative. Why is that? Should we maybe add a +1 to the first calculation? I think we do that, don't we? We add +1 here. Let's just print that again. Can I watch that live? Does it actually get appended here? No, it gets swiped. Yes. Okay, so we get something like that. Yeah. And then maybe we should floor that value. But that shouldn't be the main issue here. I'm thinking about that minuses could be a problem, but it's not a problem. It's just the scaling that saves us there, so that should be fine actually. Then let's just ask our friend here. Our terrain doesn't match what I anticipated. The top block is not stone. But let's think about that for a second again. So we're looping from the bottom to the top, basically. And we should also just loop through this here, right? So to max height and not to the chunk height, because we don't need to do anything if it's air. Yeah, but we check on that, so that should be fine. And even... Hello, Shrita Tiwari. Shouldn't try to pronounce that name, sorry. Nice to have you around, and welcome. So, top layer should be grass. If I is the max height, maybe we should just have, instead of max height, we also have our I max height. That's going to be that, and of course that's going to be an int. And then we're just going to add an I all over the place. Don't think that that's going to be the issue, but of course you can't put a grass thing there because, basically I don't know how that works in C++. If you have comparison between float and int, and if it's not 0.0 then. So let's just see whether that changes it. Need to get rid of these print statements again. wait that long. Let's just okay, so that's looking a little weird, right? Why are we drawing that top layer there, or? Okay, so that should be this way. Let's check that again. Okay, so now that's more the way I anticipated, that we have the stone on the bottom, then dirt, and then the grass. Now we have this top layer that doesn't make any sense, but that's also just... Ah, wait, it's getting dirt. Huh. Sus. Let's just... Can't we just print the terrain stack then? Ah, we don't have the chunk X, but we can get that chunk dot get chunk X, or get world X it is. And then back here, get the chunk height. Okay, and there we have 222333044. So it's just a drawing issue, right? Because 2 is stone, 3 is dirt, 0 is basically grass, and 4 is air. So that shouldn't be the issue here. So that's fine, then let's then let's just redo the comments around that. Right. So it's a drawing issue, so let's go back to cell. Hey Vince, nice to have you around. Very nice. Well... So basically the thing is, we also draw the top face there, so it's might be an issue with getting this initial cell height. So it might be an issue with getting our get height function. What the fuck? Control reaches end of non-void function. Ah. Of course we need to return our stack there. But I wanted to check the get height function of our cell, I think. Because I think the problem, as we saw, is that we have dirt above our grass, which shouldn't be there, basically. So this layer is not correct. The rest is as anticipated. So cell get height. Let's check that. Okay, so our height is 0, and then for every type in our terrain types, we're gonna go through and have, if the type is not equal to air, yeah, I think it's this +1, and we don't want to do that except if the age, the height, is equal, if it's lower or equal to 0, then I would like to, yeah, that was a good idea of you. Age equals to 1.0. So it doesn't get messed up, right? Well, let's just try without that, and if it works, it's fine, and if it doesn't work, we'll need to add that back in. What did I do? Stupid. Hello, Qua. Nice to have you around as well. But I can't do apps, I'm sorry. Or at least not for your lovely iPhone. Okay, still messed up though. We still have this thing at the top that shouldn't be there. So probably it's more or less in our draw function, I would say. Because this should be correct then. So let's go back there and check that. But boys, go ahead and start the first round without me, of course, if I take some more time here. Let's see. So the top face is also the problem. So that should be lower actually. And that means our get height doesn't work as we want it to work. And this is also not correct, right? If we have the chunk height in here, that's just the topmost block. That doesn't make any sense. We want the block of our the height of our cell. So let's say get height here. And then I'm not even sure whether we need the -1 or not. Let's just try it with it, and if it works, it's fine. If it doesn't, it's not. So it should be the grass texture at the top now, hopefully. But of course, tell me about your idea, Qua. Okay, so top is now working, and then the sides is just one off, I think. Ah, it should have been... The +1 doesn't seem to be too off, though. But now it's finally working the way I wanted it to work. Of course, the textures are not the prettiest, and especially the green is also way too bright here. But we're gonna add more advanced material properties and that kind of stuff. Probably next or the time after that. But I think what we should focus on next up is actually loading some models, so we can actually have some things in our world. But let's just actually get a final picture of our world real quick. Let's say we wanted to do, where do we set that? World age there. Let's just do, I don't know, let's try again with 8 chunks, and then what else did I want to do? The frequency, basically. Change the terrain frequency to, let's go, yeah, so it's a little more, but not too much. But why would I build it and we get rich? Because you had the idea? I'm super excited that you tell me, of course. Oh. Way too many print calls again. Definitely need to turn those off. They are in cell. I think we have still quite a few going on. I should add some, well, statements, whether we want all of these debug statements or not. And then we have our big world. I don't like the texture of our grass, as I said, but, well, it's working. And with the frequency, we can, for example, set the frequency here for our sine wave that we can beautifully see here from the side. Of course, we're gonna add noise and so on for the world generation, so we have it a lot more interesting. And then, well, it's gonna be great as soon as we add some, well, some plants, some trees, and all of those beautiful models and so on. But, well, I think that's a good point to end this episode, well, not an episode, but the stream here. Before we do that, though, of course, we should use our repository here and just add all of the things that we changed or staged them. Nope, I don't want glad. But tasks sounds good. That should be fine. And then end of stream 3, terrain finally working. Or let's call it 3D terrain finally working. Push that. And maybe at some point I'll also make that public, but for now it's not. So I really hope that you enjoyed this stream. Wish you all of the best and a very nice evening. Have a nice weekend and see you next time. Bye bye.